Welcome to Norse Talk, guys. Information of the gods. I am Red Bearded Viking. This is Red Dranger, the Red Wolf, and we are learning. So, first of all, you guys, if you guys are not following us on our Instagrams or our Discords, there is a link for those in our bios under the Beacons page. There's also a link in there to get the book if you have not got it yet. And then also, as always, guys, uh, this is a we thing, not a me or him thing. It's a you thing. So we need that help to keep this going. There's those three top spots on our Beacons page for support. So if you guys can get a chance to get over there and help give some support to help Norse Talk going. And as always, hi, number one.
Hi, number two.
And what are we doing tonight, Red?
So, guys, tonight we are moving into chapter 3 of the Asatru, Gods and Goddesses. We've all been really excited to get to this chapter. This is going to be where we get into the meat and potatoes. um,
And what are we doing after Norse Talk tonight, Red?
oh, yes. So, if you guys remember, a couple of weeks ago, we did a duel where, by showing support, me or Redbeard would paint on our faces. And during that night, there was some technical difficulties on Redbeard's side, and he wasn't able to participate. So I had to paint all by my lonesome. So tonight, after Norse Talk, we're going to be jumping into the Red Room. I will be painting the Red Wolf character and watching the comments. And Red Bearded Viking, for anybody that shows support, anybody that looks to get on that pioneer list of people supporting Norse Talk, are going to get to pick his paint tonight, and it is going to be a great time.
Yeah, so tonight will be
Um,
Paint My Face in the Red Room.
yeah, and as well, guys, we've decided after rereading this chapter several times that instead of breaking chapter 3 up into 2 episodes, we're going to break it up into 3 episodes. So tonight we are going to go through everything right until they start talking about the gods. Wednesday night we're going to start the first part of the descriptions of the god. Friday night we are still going to be trying to get altars and working through the last couple of pages where they kind of talk about doing over that. And then next Monday we'll be jumping in, finishing off chapter 3. We both feel that by doing it that way, we're going to be able to spend the time that we need to on some of the topics in here, and we're all just going to have a better time. So, getting into chapter 3, I'll shoot another question to Redbeard. Thinking of the gods and goddesses, what is your aspect of what you got from the chapter?
What I got from the chapter, the first thing I got from the chapter right off the bat was when she was going into the description and how it goes into thinking about the god and goddesses, more humanistic terms, just like you and I thinking of
Yeah.
each other. And as individuals, it sums it up as a whole instead of an individual. And it goes into just the humanization of the gods, which we were talking about last week, with
Yeah.
how we can, by humanizing the gods, we make ourselves more comparable to the gods. It's not an altruistic God. And there's many gods instead of just one.
Hmm.
And she goes into a little bit of detail over just Odin in general, as her example, where he's not just the god of war or even just a god of war, but how he is also the god of wisdom, knowledge, memory, magic, poetry, and various other things. It shows how, it's he's not just a war god, but he's a god of many aspects, which gives him depth, just like we each have our own depth. We're not just defined by one aspect of our life. We're defined by all the things that we do. And
Yeah.
then she starts going into the two groups of tribes. She goes into the Azirs and the Veneer, which are both the plural forms of the word as and van. And she also goes into the fact that some of the scholars theorize that the tribes are extinct, that one existed before the other took over, where others feel that the two tribes were deities that developed simultaneously, and that the As here for the most part, who lived in Asgard, and the Vanir, who lived in Vanaheim, were once at war, the two groups between themselves. And for a long time, they waged war against one another until they came to the realization that they had a common enemy, which was the giants and the ice giants. And at that point is when they set aside their differences. They did an exchanging of they did an exchanging of people of hostages, and from that point on, there has been no fighting between them. But that also goes into how a couple of the gods from each side have houses in the different side, because some of the houses of Azir are in Vanheim, and some of the houses of Vanheim are in Asgard, because they gained those during the hostage exchange. So some of their people are on each side, and they've been at peace ever since and waging war against the ice gods.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah,
what was your aspect on all that?
it was a really interesting intro into the chapter because, like you said, they touch on the groups and the individuality, and it's the individuality is a point that we have hit several times already just in the two chapters we've done. That differing from a monolithic kind of faith base where the gods you're looking at is perfect, is the Almighty, is something set. The different gods of the Asir and the Vanir all have their different strengths and weaknesses, and people can find commonality with that. And they can find solstice in their real life that they face the same troubles, tribulations, and challenges as some of the gods that they worship. Um, when you get in to the two distinct groups and coming together, that's something also that goes back to looking at how the differing tribes and the differing territories had to work together back then. You know, like you had to be able to set aside the differences you had in belief and work with each other in order to survive, in order to grow. And that was a value lesson that stayed with the Norse people and helped push them as far as it did. That being
Right.
said, we get into the lineage, and I'll kick it back to you for that. Um, the lineages of both houses.
Yeah, so I mean, it goes into a lot of the lineage here in both houses, which we'll be going over more as we get to those different houses later on in the book. So we're not going to focus too much on that, but it does talk a lot about how the different houses are related, the marriage bonds, and everything like that in the next three paragraphs between the end of page 24 and the beginning of page 25. Um, now that's where it gets confusing for a lot of people, and there are a lot of differences depending on what part of the geological area you are from, what's true and what's not. So we're not going to get too much into those because there is a lot of debates on that aspect of it. Um, but what we do want to get into is in the one author's prose Edda, how it relates that there were 12 gods and goddesses, and the number is actually bigger depending on which deities are counted. Um, that goes over the 12 major ones. That doesn't say there's only 12 gods and 12 goddesses, but those are the ones that we're focused on of those deities. And that the criteria used to determine the deity status varies among the different heathen tribes and the different geological tribes and neighboring tribes. But once again, that kind of goes back to how, that's one thing that I love about how it talked about the Azir and the Veneer classes, because of the fact that you guys got to remember for a long time they were waging war over each other over their differences. Even though they were worshiping a lot of the same things, they were at war over the differences between the way that it was done and everything before they came together and they combined. And that's how we get so many gods. Because just like we have to come together and respect each other's differences and respect the end result being the same, their end result was to overcome the giants, who was their real enemy that were trying to wipe them out. Um, and they gained a mutual respect for each other and the ability to come to agreements and live and coincide together even among their differences. And that's what they're kind of going into with how the different heathens and the different tribes, even though they have their differences, they respect each other and they respect their beliefs towards each god. And then uh, this chapter covers the major. So the chapter covers a few of the major and minor deities, just a few of the minors, but it also details the relations along with the mythic information about them to help you get a feel for each one. And I love how it talks about the deities are distinct entities towards the bottom of chapter 25 here, and how the heathen belief system is so that they believe that each god and goddess is his or her own individual deity, which we go into explain as we talk about each gods and what the different gods represent, and how each of the gods represent numerous different things, not just one thing. So it's not one god only represents one thing, but each god individually represents many things, and some of those things that they represent cross over to each other. So you could be worshiping the same thing but from two different gods, which I think is really amazing. And then also, when heathens speak of the gods, they speak of them as just that, deities who may be their original mythical ancestors and are worth the respect and worship. Because it's all about the respect aspect of everybody. And that's one thing that you'll notice throughout this whole book is it talks a lot about the respect and honor that the different tribes held for each other, even though they had their differences.
Yeah, it was a really interesting paragraph. I mean, I really enjoyed how they separated the differing views amongst the tribes in the Prose Edda when they do make that comment about there only being 12. And I never realized that there were so many different groups in the Northman community that only saw the gods that lived in Asgard as counting as the deities they would worship, where so many other tribes would worship the gods from Asgard as well as other ones from other realms. Hela from Helheim, for example, or Skaldi, being outside of Asgard but still part of the belief system. Um, that leads it leads really well into the next part of looking at how the different tribes related to the gods and what they believed their purpose and relationship was. There were groups of Northmen, and in their communities, they believed that the gods were the original ancestors, and their worship towards the gods was based solely on that. While others believed that the gods were these ancient beings that lived far apart from them, but were so powerful for what they did and what they'd said in their tales that they made offers and worshiped that way. While another group would say that the gods are still actively involved in their lives, that they would show them visions through trances and dreams and daywalking, stuff like that. So just again, it goes to talk about how though the core beliefs are there, they can differ so greatly in what, again, if you're looking at the modern world, what was a very, very small specific area of people.
And that's what I love about the end part of this page right here is when they do talk about all those different aspects that you did about the visions, dreams, and the magical practices, but then also how some believe that the gods are too remote and can't be directly contacted, where others believed that they were in direct contact with the gods, and that some believe that the gods intervene directly in our lives, while others believe that the gods are far too busy to take that kind of time to intervene in our lives. Um, but the aspect that no matter what, they both believed that the gods were real.
Yeah.
They didn't. Neither one of them denied the gods were real. It's just they had different ways of thinking and different ways of connecting with the gods in different aspects, which leads us on to the next page page 26 here in chapter 3, where it says Norse gods are neither infinite nor immortal. And Aduna um, is known as the keeper of the golden apples, which I'm gonna let Red, like, I love this part of the chapter when it talks about the golden apples, but I'm gonna let Red go more into the golden apple aspect of it.
Yeah, so this is an interesting part of the book and a part in Norse tradition in general because it's not super well known that the gods are again not immortal and not eternal. They have a lifespan, and these golden apples in Asgard anyway were the way that they kept young. It's the way that they kept young and powerful. You know what I mean? And if those apples weren't there, they would wither and die. It's a really interesting part of the book because it is something that differs again so greatly between monolithic faith base and Norse paganism. Is again, everything has a lifespan, everything has a start and an end, and that's part of nature, and that ties it back into paganism as itself as it begins with. Um, though again, the gods all use these apples to keep themselves young. Their ends have already been predicted, and this leads into the next art, and the first of many times we're going to talk about Ragnarok in this book, which is probably one of the most interesting theory-based approaches in the book. Is Ragnarok is seen by groups of people, and again, it's not all agreed with. It differs. Ragnarok is seen as the end, the twilight of the gods, when it stops, to again it being like nature and cycling. There are groups of people that believe that Ragnarok hasn't taken place. There's groups of people that believe that Ragnarok took place when Christianity came in, and there are other groups of people that believe Ragnarok, there's more than one, and that it, like the seasons, is always in motion, which is a theory that I really like and have been trying to think a lot more about. It goes in briefly to talk about um, the different faiths of the gods, and we'll skip over. Well, we won't skip over it, but I'm gonna hit it quickly because as we get into the descriptions of the gods later, they're gonna bring it up again. So in Ragnarok, Odin is said to be consumed by the great wolf Fenrir. Tyr is slain by the hound Garn, who guards the gates of Helheim, which is a story that I don't know much about and very much want to read more about now. Frey is killed by Surt, the great giant bent on destruction. And Surt is another really cool character because he's the one that's said to burn the realms, to burn the world, except for a few gods and two humans that escape into Yggdrasil. Which again, to me, leads back to the cycle of death and rebirth. And I don't know, Redbeard, if you agree with that or not, but I'd love to hear your opinion on it.
No, I totally do, and because Ragnarok is ultimately the end of most of the gods. It is, and that's why a lot of people believe that that happened at the birth of Christianity, but then a lot of people disagree with that, and there's a lot of aspects of whether or not Ragnarok has even happened again, and whether or not there's going to be more than one Ragnarok, which I love. And what I love is we can each have our own beliefs about it. Because me personally, I don't believe that Ragnarok could have happened at the birth of Christianity because the birth of Christianity happened during the time that Norse paganism was at its height. And if that were the case, then there would have only been two humans left, which in Christianity would have meant Adam and Eve. But then that means Christianity and the world didn't start in the Christian belief before the Viking Age and everything, which we all know can't be true. Um, but then I love how it goes into um, Ragnarok in terms of time, simply because we do not really know when it happens or if it's even happened yet. And then it talks about how ultimately there's no specific answer to the question of Ragnarok except to say that it does occur and the gods do at one point die because it's been foretold. Even all the gods have foretold it. And then it also goes into Norse gods and goddesses are not all knowing. I love this aspect because this is where it starts getting into more the humanization of the gods. Right here is when it talks about how none of the gods are all knowing and misprove that they make mistakes just as you and I do, because they've made many mistakes. They've had petty fights between one another. Later on in the book, it talks about some of those. It talks about some of the things with Odin and why he has the mistrust of women and some of the things that Odin has done to women, as far as having things stolen from him. We're not going to get into that. That's a little prequel of what's to come. Um, but also how the heathen gods, as we've seen and will continue to see, are not all good, and they express wrath, use trickery and deceit to get their ways, and they all have their own agendas, just like we do. And that just goes more into how we humanize the gods, and that makes them more attractive to us because we can relate to them. And that's one of the biggest draws as pagans to our belief system, is because we can relate to them.
Mhm. A really interesting kind of thought that I had while reading that part of the book was when they do speak of the gods not being um, omnipotent, it means that they don't, in theory, they don't exist in more than one place at a time or in more than one time at a time, if you can wrap your head around that. They're not everywhere at once. And that leads into, to me, why back then the level of what your offerings were mattered to them. You wanted to be seen, you wanted to be noticed by the god you were making an offer to, who had lots to do and wasn't everywhere at once. You wanted to draw that eye. And again, that again speaks to the fact that they're not perfect beings. You're looking to offer something to the gods to make them notice you, to make them listen to what you're asking to. It shows a desire on both sides, a want, a gift, and something in return. And that's again very different compared to a lot of monotheists. And I thought that was a really really interesting part, um, even though it was super brief, um, in that part of the chapter.
Yeah, no, that I love that part. That whole paragraph over there on 27 that you're talking about,
Yeah.
and just talking about how not only are they not immortal and not all knowing and not all good, they're not always there. Just because they can't be in numerous places at once in the way that we humanize them. Is Odin all seeing? Can Odin see everything going on? A lot of that has to do with his birds, and a lot of that has to do with his eye. Um, but that doesn't mean that he's there just because he's seeing it. That's the magical aspect of Odin that you got to look at with what he does there. And then, it just goes into the fact that all humans make mistakes along the way, but no way, human or otherwise, is perfect, and neither are the gods or goddesses, you know, and how heathens can learn how to handle their success and mistakes because the gods are more realistic examples of how to follow than any single omniscient. You know, um, we've seen that the gods make mistakes too. So it makes it okay for us when we make mistakes, as long as we're learning from the mistakes and we're taking something out of that mistake and moving forward into better things, and making sure that we're taking care of our own honor, our own discipline, taking care of our communities, and everything on that aspect, which is comforting because it allows heathens to show compassion to not only themselves but to others, because we need to be able to show compassion and realize, just as we make mistakes, other people do. And, if we're not going to hold the gods up for their mistakes, how can we hold other people up for their mistakes?
Mm-hmm.
The gods
Mm-hmm.
are about forgiving mistakes and making and coming to agreements with each other. I mean, even though, at times they're selfish, um, and because they, like it says, they all have their own agenda, you know, just like we all have our own agenda. And we're allowed to be selfish for our agenda as long as we're being honorable and respectful towards others.
Yeah.
And then the
That
next,
leads. Oh, sorry. Go outside.
no, go ahead, buddy. I was just gonna turn it
That
over to
leads.
you.
So sorry, the author refers to Odin as well. It refers to people calling Odin the king god, and it leads into another really interesting point of discussion. Is again in even modern Norse paganism and back when it was prominent before Christianity, no specific deity held sway over the entire territory. There wasn't an entire group of people that believed one god was greater than the other. And it led to a lot of debate, and still does when you speak to a god being called a king god or the all father, as that one being at the top of the pillar. And what it came down to was again the different values of different regions. In people where war was prominent and they lost a lot, they would praise the ancestors, they would praise the fathers. And so for them, a death god like Odin may have been their primary deity, where again, a farm community who was looking for protection may have looked to a guardian figure of or guardian of the realm like Thor or Freya for the fertility of both creature and earth, or Frey. It leads to again the different values and life experiences based individually and as a community, based again on geologically where you are in the world. And that leads to so much diversity that the faith had to be fluid that way. You couldn't fight with your neighbor because they valued something different than you, because you could see the reality in it. You could again relate to the humanity of those tales, and it all keeps coming back to that. And that is, I think, one of the coolest parts about Norse paganism is that it is so inclusive and involveful, but also so independent for the person, group, and group of people. And I don't know if what you think about that there, Randy.
No, I totally agree. Agree, and that's where it kind of starts going into um, the last paragraph here, last part of the last paragraph here in chapter 20, or page 27, when it talks about the relationship is the different relationships with the gods, where it says a relationship in which a person swears to be closest friends or allies to the gods or goddesses is not the same as being dedicated to one deity to the exclusion of all others. It doesn't mean
Yeah.
you're excluding all the others. And it further goes into how some tribes and different people will take oaths for certain gods, which when you take an oath to deity, sorry, you're building a relationship with that deity, and it's more conclusive. Um, Taking an oath to a deity starts that relationship, and it's common to hear, "I am sworn to that deity." And even though not all heathens take on that relationship of the oath, many do not hold themselves closer to any one deity, so they respect all the different deities. So you can
Mm-hmm.
have just a couple deities, or you can have many deities. You're
Yeah.
not bound in by one specific, but some people do bind themselves to specific deities with that oath. But it leaves the choice up to the individual. You have to take that oath yourself. Nobody can take that for you. Um, which it goes into more about the oath process in here and everything, which I'll let Dranger talk about how the oaths to the gods work when you take an oath to the god.
Yeah. So oaths to the gods can be a really interesting thing, because again, it could be to a war god like Odin. It wasn't differing for it to be oaths in retaliation to losses in family or bad crops or interfighting. Oaths are important because again, it all comes down to community. Again, when you get into community, when you get into the humanistic aspects of the gods, it also leads into the nine virtues, which again are all personal in base, but build that trust and solid foundation that support. Again, this is a kind of a coined term, but support that shield wall. It's everybody working together as individuals, but together. And oath rings were often used by men to not only to the gods but to jarls, kings, causes, to see it through. Um, there were a lot of different kinds of oaths that were made, and there's a lot of different kinds of modern oaths that's being made too. You see a lot of oath rings um, going around in modern paganism in regards to clans and stuff like that. So it's a really interesting process. It doesn't. Again, it's very individual to what you're making. You guys will notice I don't wear an oath ring. I've not made an oath yet. I have one that I will make at some point, but again, that's personal to me, and it will be completely different than why you guys wear yours, or who it's dedicated to, whether it be a god or a cause or anything. And it's another very cool aspect of it.
Right, and that's the one thing you guys got to remember about the different oath rings is there can be so many different meanings to them. Like mine specifically, is an oath of friendship and family between me and some people. It's not being part of a house or an oath to a god or anything. It's an oath that we made to each other that we have built a bond that we took an oath that we'll always keep and we'll always work through any issues that come up between us, um, and keep our friendship as it should be and
Yeah.
respect each other. And that's the oath that's the reason that we wear oath bands, between this group of friends and family. And they were sent out, and we each wear them as an oath to each other. And that's the thing to remember is, you know, um, if you're the one thing that I know we'll go into later in this book more about the oaths and what they mean. But it does talk about the fact that you need to take your oath seriously before you decide to do it, because an oath is a way of bonding yourself, and it is not. It can bring some bad luck upon you to break that oath. So, like, oaths are something to be taken very seriously, and not something to be taken on a whim. And
Yeah.
because they're not meant to be broken. Um, but then it also goes into later on that some oaths are regarded as being allowed to be broken depending on the circumstance. And the major oath that it
Mm-hmm.
talks about when it goes into that is the oath of marriage. Um, and the reasons why that one can be broken and a divorce can happen. Where, you actually back then, they had to go before somebody and give their case of why they wanted to break that oath. And they had to get permission to break that oath based on factual evidence that there was a clear cause for the oath being broken. And it wasn't just because, I changed my mind.
Yeah. Well, and even the Havamal speaks a little about that. There are verses in the words of the High One that speaks to how to lying to a liar is not a broken virtue. If you find out that an oath that you've made was made to somebody that's in proposing that oath being untrue or deceitful, that oath is null. It is null and void because it wasn't an oath made upon the virtues in the first place. And again, that is so incredibly important, even modernly now. When you're looking at something, you really have to critically think about it. You have to look at more than just what you see on the surface of it before you dedicate yourself to it, because you can be missing something. And that is so important when you're looking at every single aspect of North paganism. Is what I read in something and what Redbeard reads in something could be, we could take two very different things from it based on our backgrounds, based on our experiences, and pull strength or wisdom or courage from it for different ways. The point is, and the most important part, is that we're all here for each other while we're doing it. You have that support, you have that familyhood, that bond, and that's what it leads to. And that really leads really well until how she kind of starts wrapping up this part of the chapter, because that's not just true for how we interact with each other, but it's how we should be interacting with the literature and the knowledge that we have in front of us. No one book should be enough for any heathen. No one view should be enough for any heathen. If you're closing yourself off to wisdom, you're not following your own virtues. I mean, this chapter talks about Odin hanging himself for 9 days to master death, for giving up his eye for a sip from Mirmir's well, to gain knowledge, to continue to learn, right? Because they weren't perfect. They had to work for it. And that's what we all have to do. And in this chapter, there was some debate amongst the different Eddas and what one says to what another one says. And again, that doesn't mean that one is right and one is wrong. It means that they all have something to add, no matter what they call it. This chapter refers to a version of the Prose Edda by Anthony Folks as being the complete Prose Edda because it has a section in it that was translated that a lot of others don't. And that adds something to it, but it doesn't replace the others, and it doesn't replace the Poetic Edda, which is again seen as the Elder Edda, because you're going to learn and you're going to take something from all of it, and that's what this is all about. And I can pretty much
right?
guarantee
And
that Redbeard's going to agree with that.
yeah, right. Because she the last paragraph before it starts on the gods and goddesses here, when she starts talking about, because she tells you that the list follows covers what is known about each deity, but to keep in mind that not all deities were worshipped in all places, and that she had included some alternative spellings and names as appropriate, and that where she references some of the places where she got the myths coming from the Prose Edda, and then also the Poetic and the Elder Edda, and the collections of poems, songs, and the heroic lays. But then it just refers to, so many different aspects of different Eddas, and even different authors for different Eddas. So she didn't just like go, oh, well, this author has the only right Edda, whether it be prose, elder, or poetic. She referenced how she got it from many different Eddas, um, and made sure that she recognized that, and how she talks about the different areas like the Icelandic and everything, and make sure that she breaks it down by looking at not just one geological area either, but looking from the different traditional and non-traditional aspects that came out. But also then, you know, how they were seen pre-Christian age, and the fact that she does depict that most of these books were written after Christianity and were translated and not actually written by the Norse themselves, but were translated by stories heard in different areas from the different tribes that were in the area at that time. And that's why there is so many different geological and tribunal aspects to look at from tribe to tribe and area to area to look at from houses to houses. Um, I think she really did her homework when she wrote this book. It's obvious throughout it. If you guys, even when we got done with chapter two, if you looked at I believe it was in chapter two, um, yeah, at the back of chapter two on the notes, you know, she accredited different, even different volumes in different books and places. So, like, she has at the end of almost every chapter reference material of where she came to her conclusions, showing that not only us, but the author of this book as well did her homework, and she read into all the different areas and different books before she came to any conclusions and put out her own book. So she made sure that she kept true to the fact that it is a act of homework for this religion based paganism, because there is, and she proves it, there is no one all way. She talks about it all the time. There is no one source. There is no one all masterful book that outlines exactly how you're supposed to do things. And the aspect of that's why there are so many variants in how things are done, but how it's not so much the aspect of how things are done, but the aspect of the conclusion that we're all trying to come to. And just like it talked about in this chapter, you know, the 12 different gods and goddesses are by all means not the only deities, the ones that they focus on in the Edda, and how the fact that um, the Ashir and the Veneer, you know, those were separate that were combined by the exchange of hostages, because their beliefs at one time were different and they became to believe a lot of the same things once they combined them together. So, like, this book has so much information from so many different resources, you guys. And I love that, this is only the first of many books we're going to be going through. We will get into the Eddas at some point. We're going to be getting into the Havanah next. So, we're definitely going to continue this knowledge and this learning process. And that's what's great about this experience is it's giving us a chance to not only learn about it, but discuss it and get different viewpoints from people that are new, people that have been in um, the Norse communities and been Norsemen and Norse pagans for a long time. And we're getting all those different stories and all those different aspects and people coming together in one place right here and talking throughout the comments with each other. And Red and I discussing things. We're at two different levels where we are as Norse pagans. I'm at a very beginner level where he's at kind of a mid to intermediate level. Neither one of us are novices. Neither one of us are all knowledgeable about this. And I don't think there's really any, if so, not many, that are all knowledgeable about it because it is a continuous learning experience and a continuous seeking of knowledge through different avenues. Mm-hmm. Like it never stops. The learning process just never stops. And
well,
the sharing
I think,
of stories.
Oh, sorry about that, bud.
No,
I think that is such an important fact to remember about all of this is even this book is an opinion. It is a gathered group of thoughts written down and organized by an individual. So what your first introduction to paganism might have said could be completely different than this, but they don't just value each other. And we need to remember that not just in our lives looking at literature, but looking at the experiences from others. There are people that have been in Norse paganism their entire lives. There are people that come forward saying that they know it all. They always have the right answer. And to them, they might. But they have the right answer based on their background. Nobody has the whole combination of the North Way in one house. It just doesn't happen. It's too vast. They can have ideas, they can have theories like we all do, but there's no one way. And I think that is something that we can't hammer home enough. There's no one way.
And that's the thing is even the ancestors back in that era did not claim to be all knowing and claim to be all knowledgeable about it. Yeah. But all because they all talked about the aspect of as they visited different tribes that they haven't visited and visited different geological areas that they hadn't. And they were able to see how they did some of the things. A lot of times they brought that back and they shared that knowledge and it started a small change in each community.
Yeah.
Because they may not have adapted the whole way that they did something, but they saw something that they were doing that they were able to add to what they were doing that made sense to them. And they're like, we just never saw this before.
Yeah.
And that's why the stories did change over time. And why even in certain families, the traditions had changed a little bit over time because they continued to learn and they continued to grow. And they never talk about a stop in learning or a stop in growth.
Exactly. I mean, I think I think you can sum it up. I mean, we talked about it briefly. We didn't get into Odin's passage, and we will on the next episode.
Yep.
But I always just kind of retaliate or reduce it down to this. Most of us know the tales of Odin. Most of us know what he has done in order to gain knowledge. And even in this chapter alone, it reminds us that he's not all knowing. Look at the distance he's gone, the sacrifices he's made to gain knowledge. He won't turn it away. And it's important that we all have that mindset. And I think that is probably one of the best lessons of this chapter is we all have
Right.
to put in the effort.
Right, because it even talks about, and we'll go more into it next week, but it talks about when Odin was hanging for those 9 days over the pool, and that's when he saw the runes, and he reached in to get the runes, and that's where he got the power of being able to read the runes, and the magical ability to cast the runes and cast minds, and it goes a little bit into that in the next area that we're going to go into as well, but it's just showing that Odin everything that Odin has now and may have at the end of his life, whether or not you believe Ragnarok has happened or not. But if you don't believe it has happened, then you can't believe that Odin isn't still trying to find more ways to gain knowledge and more ways to gain more mythical powers and everything else.
Mm-hmm.
Because Odin is like a good example of a go-getter of I want, I want, I want. I want to keep gaining. I want to keep learning. I want to keep gaining different aspects and gaining more abilities. Odin never in anything that I've read. Odin never said, "Okay, this is enough. I'm happy."
Mm-hmm.
He
And I
just
mean
kept
this
striving.
is yeah, and this is coming from a creator level god. So again, when you look at the creation of Midgard, it was Odin and his two brothers. They cast Midgard um, out of a corpse. They built it. They were creation level entities. They could create life, and yet they were still, and he was still so determined to gain knowledge. It shows you how valuable it is, and it comes back to again that one valuable lesson. When somebody's telling you that they've learned enough, or somebody's telling you that they already know it all, they're lying to themselves and they're being deceitful with you. And that's not in true with the nine virtues either. We all should be open. We all should be still learning. We should all be willing to hear what each other has to say, because you never know where that next little spark of wisdom that's going to come from that's going to change your life. You know what I
Exactly.
mean? So, and it's so important. And that was the greatest part of that chapter.
No,
To
I
me.
totally agree. But we are going to shortly here, you guys. We're going to open it up for the Q&A section. So on Wednesday, you guys, at 9 p.m. Central, we will be back here live to go over the second of the three parts of chapter 3. We are going to go over from pages, um, we're going to go over the 5 major gods in the next section that come up, and then we will break off shortly after that, and then we'll go over the last few pages and deal with the last 5 major gods that are talked about the most. We will touch on god, every single god that she talks about. We will touch on, but some of them there is only 1 or 2 sentences about the gods or the deities in that area, but we will definitely make sure we touch on every single one of them as we go through because we want to put as much knowledge and gain as much knowledge out of this section as possible. But as always, guys, stick around for the next portion of this, the Q&A. Um, we are excited about that section to hear what everybody has to say about this. And don't forget, if you guys have not followed us on our Instagram pages or followed the Discord, those are both on our bios and our beacon pages. And always, guys, help with that support, those first 3 support tabs on the beacons pages as well. And we will be headed to the red room after the Q&A portion for anybody that still wanted to see me paint my face, which did not happen on Pioneers Night because of some TikTok technical issues. We are going to hold that tonight, so you guys can get in on that by hitting one of those 3 support pages and putting your support in there. When you put your support in, you get to tell me what to paint on a section of my face. So we will be going into that portion of it when we hit the red room tonight, after the Q&A section.
So I am going to end this live now, and I will see you guys over there
So
shortly.
as always, guys, remember, it's not a me thing, it's not a him thing, it's a we thing. We can't do it without each and every one of you guys. You guys are amazing. We love you guys. Always stay amazing, stay creating, stay awesome. Stick around for the Q&A part. This is Red Bearded Viking. This is the Red Dranger signing off on this portion of Norse Talk. We'll see you guys in the Q&A.